There was a time when television didn't rush to explain every mystery. There were no open endings being dissected on social media, and no character stepping forward to tell you what was right or wrong. There was only a black and white screen, a story that lasted less than 30 minutes, and a chilling feeling that stayed with you long after the episode ended. That was The Twilight Zone. Premiering from 1959 to 1964, the anthology series created by Rod Serling turned television into a place filled with difficult questions. What happens when people are consumed by greed? What is more terrifying than monsters from outer space? And could the greatest threat to us be human nature itself? Each episode felt like a doorway into a strange world, where every familiar rule could collapse in just a few minutes. Some stories frightened you, some left you in silence, and some, decades later, still make viewers wonder, if I had been there, would I have acted differently? Today, we're going to explore 12 strange facts you probably didn't know about the Twilight Zone. And be sure to stay for number 1, because this series still hides some incredible behind-the-scenes secrets. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. It helps YouTube know that you enjoy deep, nostalgic videos about your favorite classic shows. Alright, let's begin. Number 12. The script that almost died in a drawer. Imagine if, because of one decision made by a few television executives, the Twilight Zone had never existed. It almost happened. In 1957, Rod Serling wrote a strange script called The Time Element. From its very first pages, it contained many of the ingredients that would later become the DNA of the Twilight Zone: time travel, an unshakable sense of unease, and a twist ending that stayed with viewers long after the story was over. At the center of the story is a desperate man who seeks help from a psychiatrist. He insists that he keeps having the same dream over and over again. But this is no ordinary nightmare. In his dream, he is in Honolulu on December 6, 1941, just one day before the attack on Pearl Harbor.
How could it be 1941? It's 1958. How could it be 1941? It's 1958. 1958.
What makes it terrifying is that the dream lasts a little longer each night. Everything becomes more detailed and more realistic until he begins to believe he isn't dreaming at all. Somehow, he is being pulled back through time to a place where he is certain he is going to die. When CBS executives read the script, their reaction was overwhelmingly negative. They thought the story was too dark, too strange, and far too intelligent for television audiences of that era. In their view, viewers would never understand such a complicated plot. So they did what many creative ideas have suffered through over the years. They bought the script, paid Serling for it, and then placed it in a drawer and nearly forgot it existed. But sometimes history changes because of the smallest accidents. A year later, producer Burt Granite was searching for material for the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. While digging through CBS's pile of abandoned scripts, he happened to come across The Time Element. This time, someone recognized its value. That person was Desi Arnaz, the man behind the success of I Love Lucy. Despite CBS's doubts, he decided to put the script on the air on November 24, 1958. What happened next stunned the entire network. Back then, a show's success wasn't measured by online views or social media reactions. It was measured by audience letters. Just days after The Time Element aired, CBS's mailroom was nearly overwhelmed. Thousands of letters poured in from across America. Viewers didn't simply say they liked the program. They said it kept them awake at night. It haunted them. They couldn't stop thinking about the ending. Ironically, the very element that executives believed audiences were too unintelligent to understand became the thing the public loved most. CBS finally realized it had made a colossal mistake. The script they had buried in a drawer had turned out to be a goldmine.
Mr. Jensen?
Pete.
Pete? Are you all right?
Oh, sure, I'm all right. Why?
Well, this morning you seemed so sure it was another year.
They immediately contacted Rod Serling and offered him the opportunity to develop an entirely new series. And from a manuscript once considered too strange to survive, The Twilight Zone was born. It all began with a forgotten script, a dusty drawer, and thousands of viewers who proved that their imaginations had been seriously underestimated. Number 11. That familiar theme song wasn't the original music. When The Twilight Zone premiered in 1959, Rod Serling wanted everything to feel first class. He didn't hire an ordinary television composer. Instead, he brought in Bernard Herrmann, the musical genius who had worked with Alfred Hitchcock and would later become immortal for the chilling violin score of Psycho. Herrmann composed an opening theme that was deeply cinematic. It carried the sound of a full orchestra, elegant, dark, and reminiscent of a classic Hollywood horror film. Listening to it, you could feel a sense of unease quietly creeping into your mind. But there was one problem. It was too subtle. Critics admired the piece, but it lacked staying power. It didn't startle listeners. It didn't create that instant reaction where audiences could hear just a few notes and immediately think of the show. In other words, it was a beautiful work of art, but it wasn't yet an icon. When the series entered its second season, the production team decided to take a completely different direction. They no longer wanted music that sounded like a Hollywood movie score. They needed something stranger, sharper, and more unsettling. Something that felt as though it came from a place beyond this world. That's when they turned to French composer Marius Constant. The strange part is that Constant was never asked to write a theme song for the Twilight Zone. In fact, he had simply recorded several short musical pieces for a production music library, where producers could later pull whatever cues they wanted to use. They were merely small experiments, nothing more. Then something unexpected happened. The producers took two separate pieces, titled Étrange 3 and Milieu 2, combined them, and almost accidentally created an entirely new piece of music. Just a few short guitar notes, accompanied by tense bongo rhythms. The sound was rough around the edges, somewhat fragmented, and completely unconventional. But that very strangeness created magic. The moment those four notes played, viewers instantly felt that something unusual was about to happen. They didn't even need to look at the screen. Their brains automatically prepared for a mysterious story. Perhaps the most remarkable part is that Marius Constant had no idea he had just helped create one of the most recognizable themes in television history. Throughout most of the Twilight Zone's original run, he remained in France and had barely watched the program. It wasn't until years later, when unexpected royalty payments started arriving, that he realized a few experimental pieces he had once composed had become the haunting sound of an entire generation. Number 10. Before they became legends, they failed spectacularly. Future movie stars had to pay their dues before they found fame. They yelled at fortune-telling machines, argued with monsters, and acted themselves to exhaustion in black and white television episodes. This wasn't the kind of show that invited famous celebrities to make quick appearances for ratings. Quite the opposite. The Twilight Zone was more like a high-pressure laboratory. Its scripts forced actors to do things that ordinary productions rarely demanded. Carry on conversations with a fortune-telling machine, be terrified of creatures that didn't exist, or convey sheer horror almost entirely through their eyes and facial expressions. One of the most famous examples is William Shatner. Years before putting on the Star Trek uniform and becoming the legendary Captain Kirk, he delivered one of the most memorable performances in the Twilight Zone. In Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, Shatner plays an airline passenger flying through a violent storm. Looking out the window, he sees a bizarre creature crawling along the wing of the airplane. No one else can see it. No one believes him. As the minutes pass, Shatner's character becomes increasingly frantic. Sweat pours down his face, his eyes widen in terror, and he ultimately loses all control. The image became one of the most parodied moments in American television history. Interestingly, this wasn't the only time the Twilight Zone put William Shatner through psychological torment. In another episode, Nick of Time, he becomes obsessed with a fortune-telling machine sitting on a diner table. From a plastic devil's head to a monster on an airplane wing, Shatner seemed to spend his early career battling fears that no one else could see. Then there was Burt Reynolds. At the time, he didn't yet have his famous mustache or the confident, larger-than-life persona that audiences would later love.
Guy who plays Jeremy's gonna have to know what it's all about. A mature guy who knows the score. A guy with some zazz, a guy with some moxie. A guy who understands tertiary motivation.
In The Bard, Reynolds plays a young actor imitating the style of Marlon Brando. His mumbling speech, casual attitude, and effortless charm make it clear that even as an unknown performer, he already possessed the magnetic presence of a star. Robert Redford also passed through this strange world. In Nothing in the Dark, he plays death itself. Yet rather than being frightening, Redford's character is calm, gentle, and almost radiates peace. His performance transformed a story about death into one of the most moving episodes in the entire series. And if there is one face that represents the spirit of the Twilight Zone, it may be Burgess Meredith. He appeared in 4 episodes, more than any other leading actor in the series.
I'm not going to starve to death anyway. Lots of food. Food enough to last for years and years and years and years.
Meredith's characters were often ordinary, fragile, and lonely people who found themselves endlessly tormented by fate. Audiences saw in them fear, vulnerability, and the universal desire to be understood. There was even another special figure that few people know about, Robert McCord. He wasn't a major star, but he appeared in dozens of episodes in supporting and background roles. Once you recognize his face, you almost can't help searching for him in every episode that follows. The Twilight Zone didn't just launch the careers of many legends, it was also a brutal test, a place where their talent was pushed to its absolute limits. Number 9. The narrator nobody wanted, including himself. The first thing that comes to many people's minds when they think of the Twilight Zone isn't a monster, an alien, or a shocking twist ending. It's the image of a man in a suit, a cigarette in his hand, calmly looking straight into the camera and saying, in an even voice, that you're about to enter a world where all familiar rules no longer apply. The irony is that Rod Serling never intended to become that man.
Antiseptically, rigidly acceptable show. Why it bore no relationship at all to what we had purported to say initially.
He wanted someone with an almost supernatural presence, a voice powerful enough to command the audience's attention from the very first sentence. At one point, the production team even considered Orson Welles, the genius who had once sent America into a panic with the radio broadcast of War of the Worlds. But there was one very simple problem: money. Welles's asking price was far beyond the show's budget. Other candidates were gradually ruled out as well. Some sounded too much like radio announcers, others were overly theatrical, and a few came across as if they were telling a cheap ghost story. As preparations for the first season continued, time was running out. Eventually, with almost no options left, Rod Serling reluctantly made a suggestion that he himself didn't particularly like. He would try being the narrator. Serling never considered himself an actor. He believed he looked stiff and uncomfortable on camera.
And now, Mr. Serling.
This may look to you like any dismal, dark, and dingy alley that lies skulking off the million myriad shadow places off the main drags. Actually, it's the private domain of leprechauns and elves and supplies the locale of next week's Twilight Zone.
He disliked his own voice, feeling that it was too dry, too weary, and lacking in charisma. But then he stepped in front of the camera. Strangely enough, the very things he considered flaws became his greatest strengths. He didn't try to perform, he simply stood there, sometimes leaning against the set, sometimes looking directly at the audience. His voice wasn't dramatic, threatening, or intentionally mysterious. It was frighteningly calm, like a man who had already read the final page of the story and knew that what was about to happen to you would not end well. Then there was the famous cigarette. In many of the opening sequences, cigarette smoke slowly drifted around Serling's face as he introduced another dimension. It wasn't a carefully planned prop. Serling was, in fact, a heavy smoker. His raspy, slightly rough voice wasn't the product of acting either. It was simply the result of years of smoking. At first, Serling mostly appeared as an off-screen narrator, but as audiences increasingly fell in love with his cool and mysterious presence, his role in front of the camera continued to grow. The man who once believed he was completely unsuited for television ultimately became the one figure forever inseparable from the Twilight Zone. Number 8. the episode that seemed to predict its star's brush with death. The scariest part of The Twilight Zone wasn't always what appeared on the screen. Sometimes, the real chill came from what happened after the cameras stopped rolling. On February 12, 1960, CBS aired an episode titled The Purple Testament. The story centers on an American officer during World War II, played by William Reynolds. His character possesses a gift, or perhaps a curse. He can see a strange glow on the faces of people who are about to die.
Cars, houses, the works. But something's wrong in the scene. Something very abnormal amidst the normal. You'll see what I mean when next week we bring you Elegy by Charles Beaumont. It stars Cecil Kellaway. Thank you and good night.
One by one, the soldiers marked by that eerie light disappear from his life. No one believes him. No one understands what he's seeing. Then one day, he looks into a mirror and realizes that the terrifying glow has appeared on his own face. What makes the episode especially striking is that viewers never actually see the character die. There is no dramatic battle, no tragic death scene, only the sound of an explosion in the distance. Then the screen fades to black. Rod Serling understood a simple but incredibly effective principle. What the imagination creates is often more frightening than anything that can be shown on a screen.
Maple Street, USA. Late summer. A tree-lined little world of front porch gliders, barbecues, the laughter of children, and the bell of an ice cream vendor.
But then the story took a turn that felt almost like an episode of The Twilight Zone itself. On the very day The Purple Testament aired, actor William Reynolds and director Richard Bear were traveling together in a small airplane. During the flight, the aircraft suddenly crashed. Both men survived. It was merely a coincidence, at least in theory. Yet it's hard not to feel a chill when you think about the timing. An episode about a man foreseeing his own death aired on the exact day its leading actor nearly lost his life in the real world. The line between fiction and reality seemed to blur within the span of just a few hours. William Reynolds rarely spoke about the incident. He went on to enjoy a successful television career and lived well into his 90s. Even so, for fans of The Twilight Zone, the crash has always carried an unsettling feeling that's difficult to describe. Perhaps it was only a coincidence, or perhaps Rod Serling had touched on the very thing that made The Twilight Zone so special. He didn't merely write about supernatural fears. He wrote about those moments that make us stop and wonder whether stories are ever just stories, because sometimes an idea, once told, doesn't disappear when the episode ends. It continues to echo in the real world, and sometimes that echo seems just a little louder than it should be. Number 7. The art film that stole an Oscar. Some episodes of The Twilight Zone scare you. Some leave you thinking for hours after they're over. But then there is one episode that creates an entirely different feeling. It makes you wonder whether you're even watching television anymore. In 1964, The Twilight Zone made a decision that very few television shows would have dared to attempt.
The ingredients, an American destroyer, the Pacific Ocean, and the ghostly sound of hammering from 30 fathoms below. They add up to a strange tale of the bizarre and nightmarish. Mike Kellen and Simon Oakland star in a very different kind of Twilight Zone, which we call the 30-fathom grave.
Instead of writing a new script, the production team purchased the rights to a French short film called An Occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge. The film was directed by Robert Enrico and was based on the famous short story by writer Ambrose Bierce. Originally published all the way back in 1890, the decision was both bold and practical. Buying the rights cost only a fraction of what it would have taken to produce an entirely new episode. There was no need to hire actors, build sets, schedule filming, or prepare props. Essentially, CBS already had a completed film in its hands. The only thing left to do was turn it into an episode of The Twilight Zone. Rod Serling appeared at the beginning and end with his familiar narration, while almost everything in between remained untouched. But the moment the episode began, viewers realized they were watching something completely different. It didn't have the rhythm of American television at the time. The camera moved slowly and gracefully, as if drifting through a dream. Every shot felt cinematic, making many television programs of the era seem rigid by comparison. What was even stranger was that the film contained almost no dialogue. There were no characters explaining things to the audience. There were no long speeches or moral lessons stated outright. Instead, there was the sound of wind moving through the trees, footsteps against the ground, birds singing, and stretches of silence so long that they became uncomfortable.
Heavy. Heavy. Heavy.
For viewers accustomed to Rod Serling's poetic monologues, it was almost an alien experience. Then came the ending. The audience discovers that the protagonist's desperate escape took place only during the brief instant before his death. The entire journey was merely a final flash of consciousness. The twist hit many viewers like a blow to the chest. What makes the story even more remarkable is that this film had already won the Academy Award for Best Live-Action Short Film before it ever aired on The Twilight Zone. Yet because of licensing restrictions, it rarely appeared in later reruns. Over time, the episode almost became a legend. Many older viewers insist they saw it and remember being haunted by it, while younger audiences have rarely had the chance to encounter it. And then there's one final twist worthy of Rod Serling himself. The only episode of The Twilight Zone ever connected to an Oscar was also the one he didn't write. Number 6, the most expensive shot in the Twilight Zone history. If you looked at the budget of The Twilight Zone, you would never imagine that the show could take its audience on a journey across millions of years of history. But that's exactly what it tried to do. The episode The Odyssey of Flight 33 begins with what seems like a simple situation. A Boeing 707 is on an ordinary flight when it suddenly disappears from the present. In an instant, the crew realizes they are flying over an entirely different Earth. First, they enter the age of dinosaurs. Then they find themselves above New York City in 1939.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Farber. We encountered some momentary difficulty back there, but as you can see, we're over New York City now and should be landing inside of just a few minutes. Thank you.
For television in the early 1960s, the idea was almost insane. A typical episode of The Twilight Zone had a budget of around $50,000. That money had to cover everything: new actors, new sets, new costumes, and new special effects. Because it was an anthology series, the show essentially had to build an entirely different movie from scratch almost every single week. But Flight 33 demanded even more. The producers had to construct a custom airplane cockpit, use aerial footage, and create effects that television of that era rarely dared to attempt. The most expensive part was a shot that lasted only a brief moment: a stop-motion dinosaur. The dinosaur wasn't actually created specifically for The Twilight Zone. It was borrowed from the 1960 film Dinosaurus.
Skipper, verify something for me, would you? And in a hurry? Look! It's not possible.
What in the name of everything holy is going on?
Even though it appeared for only a few seconds, that shot still cost around $2,500 for a significant amount of money for a series that had to carefully watch every dollar it spent. CBS executives were not pleased. They repeatedly questioned the wisdom of spending so much money just to put a dinosaur on the screen for a few brief seconds. But this is where The Twilight Zone proved what made it truly great. The episodes people remember most are not the ones with the biggest budgets or the most spectacular effects. They are the ones with the best ideas. A broken pair of glasses, an empty library, or an apartment slowly growing hotter like the end of the world can haunt audiences far longer than any expensive special effect ever could. In the end, what stays in people's minds isn't the dinosaur itself. It's the idea of the dinosaur. Number 5. The one-man tape recorder factory. Today, a television series can be created by hundreds of people, endless visual effects, and algorithms designed to analyze audience preferences. But The Twilight Zone was born in a way that almost no longer exists. At the center of it all was Rod Serling. He wasn't just the man who appeared in front of the camera with that familiar, gravelly voice. Most of the time, Serling was like someone haunted by his own stories. He would pace back and forth around his office, a half-smoked cigarette in his hand, dictating dialogue into a tape recorder. He experimented with every pause, every moment of silence, and every line of dialogue until they sounded exactly the way he imagined them.
Twilight Zone, we offer you the unbelievable along with an explanation. 3 men visit a strange new world with people, cars, houses, the works.
In a way, The famous monologues of the Twilight Zone were really Rod Serling telling stories to himself. But he wasn't fighting alone. Alongside Serling were two other gifted writers, Richard Matheson and Charles Beaumont. Together, they became the show's nearly irreplaceable creative trio. Matheson brought audiences nightmares such as Nightmare at 20,000 Feet.
Both of Bill's Twilight Zone, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, I think he was just fantastic.
Where did that idea come from?
I was on an airplane and I looked out, it was all these fluffy clouds, and I thought, gee, what if I saw a guy skiing?
Meanwhile, Beaumont had a talent for crafting strange stories in which humor and horror coexisted inside twisted, surreal worlds. These three men created much of the soul of the Twilight Zone. But creativity at that intensity always comes with a price. By the time the series reached its final season, Rod Serling was nearly exhausted. Years of constantly writing, rewriting, and battling network censors had drained him. At one point, Serling admitted that he had begun to feel as if he were simply repeating his old ideas. He even sold part of his ownership stake in the show because he believed the Twilight Zone would eventually be forgotten. Then life delivered a twist that could have come straight from one of their own scripts. Charles Beaumont developed a rare brain disorder that caused his body to age at a terrifying speed. In a remarkably short time, he looked far older than his actual years. His close friends had to complete some of his final scripts for him so that he could continue receiving royalty payments. It's strange to think about. The very people who spent years writing about fear, human fragility, and the cruel ironies of fate eventually found themselves confronting tragedies that were not so different from the stories they had created. Number 4. Why was it called the Twilight Zone? Did you know that the Twilight Zone wasn't a name created simply because it sounded mysterious? It actually came from a very real fear. In aviation, the Twilight Zone was a term some pilots used to describe one of the most dangerous moments in a flight. It often occurred at dusk, dawn, or in heavy fog, when the horizon suddenly disappeared. Sky and earth blended into the same dull gray color. There were no longer any reference points to determine direction. And when your eyes can no longer tell what is up and what is down, your body begins to betray you. The inner ear can convince a pilot that the aircraft is flying perfectly level when, in reality, it is descending toward disaster. That moment of uncertainty, when nothing appears to be wrong, yet everything is actually wrong, is what many pilots called the Twilight Zone.
The problem is simply that the plane is going too fast, and there is nothing within the realm of knowledge or at least logic to explain it. Unbeknownst to passenger and crew, this aeroplane is heading into an uncharted region, well off the beaten track of commercial traveling.
Rod Serling was fascinated by that idea. Before becoming a celebrated writer, he had served as a paratrooper during World War II. He experienced numerous military flights and witnessed situations in which survival depended on maintaining one's sense of direction during exactly these kinds of ambiguous moments. Serling understood something very special about fear. It doesn't necessarily emerge in complete darkness. Sometimes, our greatest fears appear in the half-light, when we can still see everything around us but are no longer certain that we're interpreting what we see correctly. The same idea exists in nature. Far out in the ocean lies a region known as the Twilight Zone, where only traces of sunlight remain. It isn't bright enough to be considered daytime, yet it isn't dark enough to be called night. The creatures that live there have bizarre forms, enormous eyes, glowing bodies, and appearances that make people uneasy, even if they can't explain why. It's a place where the rules of the ordinary world seem to stop working and strange things begin to emerge. At first, Serling experimented with other titles, including the Zone of Twilight, before finally settling on the name we know today. But the Twilight Zone won out because it was both scientific and poetic. It sounded believable and mysterious at the same time.
It is the middle ground between light and shadow, between science and superstition, and it lies between the pit of man's fears and the summit of his knowledge. This is the dimension of imagination. It is an area which we call the Twilight Zone.
By borrowing a term from aviation, Serling made the supernatural feel like nothing more than another branch of physics that humanity had not yet discovered. And eventually, the phrase escaped the boundaries of the television series itself. It became a familiar expression in popular culture. Number 3. The show was born because the censors were too short-sighted. Before The Twilight Zone, Rod Serling was already one of America's most respected television writers. He had won major awards and was known for his hard-hitting stories about war, injustice, and racial discrimination. Audiences loved his honesty, but sponsors didn't.
Who's the culprit? Is it the network, the sponsor? It sure is not the FCC.
No, it's certainly not the FCC, ideally speaking, of course. It's a combination of culprits in this case, Mike. It's partly network, it's principally agency and sponsor. In many ways, I think it's the audience themselves.
In the 1950s, television programs depended heavily on advertising money from large corporations. And those companies followed one simple rule: don't create controversy. If a script had any chance of making a group of viewers uncomfortable, it would be altered without mercy. Serling finally reached his breaking point while writing a script inspired by the murder of Emmett Till, the 14-year-old black boy who was brutally killed in the American South. Originally, the story was a powerful condemnation of racial violence, but when it reached the censors, everything began to disappear. The victim was no longer black. The setting was no longer the South. Even the word lynching was removed. One by one, every sharp and uncomfortable detail was cut away, until the story no longer had anything important to say. For Serling, it was a shock. He realized that if he spoke directly about America's problems, he would always be stopped. But if he placed the story on a distant planet, had aliens speak those truths, or turned prejudice into a supernatural curse, the censors didn't seem to notice. And that's when Rod Serling found his escape. Monsters, robots, and Martians became the perfect disguise. On the surface, The Twilight Zone looked like a strange science fiction series. But underneath were stories about the fear of nuclear war, extremism, prejudice, and the deep contradictions within American society. The greatest irony is that the very people who tried to silence Rod Serling accidentally handed him an even more powerful weapon. They forced him to tell stories through symbols, allegories, and imagination. And that is precisely what allowed his messages to outlive their own era. Without those battles with censorship, The Twilight Zone might never have existed. Censorship didn't silence Rod Serling. It simply forced him to speak in a language that was smarter, stranger, and far more dangerous. And millions of viewers listened without ever realizing they were watching social commentary disguised as stories about monsters and aliens. Number 2, the ride that brought Rod Serling back from the dead. Disney took something eerie and transformed it into a nostalgic journey that you experience with your entire body. That journey is the Twilight Zone Tower of Terror. At first glance, it's simply a drop ride. But the people who created it didn't want to build just another scary elevator. They wanted to recreate an entire world that had disappeared decades earlier. And it all began with Rod Serling himself. The moment you step inside the Hollywood Tower Hotel, you hear his familiar voice. Slow, calm, and filled with mystery. But there's a secret that most guests never realize. Not every line you hear is actually Serling's voice. To complete the narration, Disney hired voice actor Mark Silverman to recreate the missing portions. The sound engineers then carried out a task that bordered on obsessive in its attention to detail. They used vintage recording equipment, added the distinctive static and audio texture of 1960s television, and fine-tuned every tiny detail until Silverman's voice blended seamlessly with Serling's original recordings. The result is remarkable. To most guests, it sounds as though Rod Serling himself has returned to guide the experience. But that was only the beginning. In old footage, Serling almost always appeared with a cigarette in his hand. The image became so iconic that many fans felt it simply wasn't Rod Serling without it. Yet Disney had a strict policy against depicting smoking, so the designers quietly removed the cigarette digitally. If you look closely, you'll notice that Serling's hand still curves, as though it's holding an invisible object. It's like the trace of a ghost, something most visitors may never notice. Then there are the other small details: the devil-headed fortune-telling machine, the broken pair of glasses, the book To Serve Man, the lonely trumpet, the cobwebs, the layers of dust covering forgotten objects, and the dramatic lighting reminiscent of classic film noir. Every corner of the hotel is a tribute to the Twilight Zone. That's what makes the Tower of Terror different. You aren't simply stepping onto a thrill ride, you're entering a living museum of the Twilight Zone, where every object tells a story. And just as you begin to feel that you belong in that world, the elevator doors open. Then you plunge 13 stories into the darkness below. Number 1. Rod Serling's $1 Million Mistake. Today, we watch an old television show and simply assume that it will live forever. But in the early 1960s, nobody thought that way. Back then, television was considered disposable. An episode would air, maybe get one rerun, and then be put away in a vault and quickly forgotten. No one imagined that people would still be watching these programs decades later. Rod Serling believed the same thing. After 5 seasons of The Twilight Zone, he was exhausted. Hundreds of pages of scripts, endless battles with censors, and the constant pressure to create had convinced him that the journey was over. In one interview, Serling said,
I read it and didn't realize it was about me. I'm not depressed. I don't have that massive an ego that I run around preoccupied with myself. I'm particularly sorry you brought it up, Dick, because I've been fascinated by what's been said here this evening.
That was when CBS made him an offer that seemed impossible to refuse. They wanted to buy 40% of his ownership stake in the show for about $600. In 1964, that was an enormous fortune. For a television writer, it was enough money to guarantee financial security for life. Serling thought it over and agreed to sell. He had no regrets. In his mind, The Twilight Zone would eventually grow old like every other television program. Black and white stories about greed, fear, and morality probably wouldn't mean much to future generations. Then something happened that nobody expected. Just a few years later, independent television stations across America suddenly needed programming to fill their schedules, and they discovered that The Twilight Zone was almost perfect for the job. The series began airing again and again, then again and again. New audiences kept discovering it. Old audiences kept returning to it. It turned out that the themes Serling had written about were not outdated at all. Human beings were still afraid, still greedy, still suspicious of one another, and still haunted by questions about fate. The Twilight Zone didn't grow old. It became immortal. And that's when the irony appeared. Had he kept that ownership stake, Rod Serling almost certainly would have earned an enormous fortune over the decades that followed. Instead, he continued working tirelessly, writing scripts, teaching, and developing new projects. The man who spent his career telling stories about life's cruel twists of fate ultimately became the main character in one of those stories himself. It's a very Twilight Zone ending. A man who created stories about the unpredictability of life eventually found himself on the receiving end of life's greatest twist of all. And those are 12 of the strangest facts about the Twilight Zone. Let us know in the comments which ones surprised you the most. Thank you for staying with us all the way to the final moments of this video. Every view, every comment, and every share means more to us than you know and gives us the motivation to keep searching, researching, and bringing you even more fascinating stories. If you enjoyed today's video, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next videos. See you again in the next journey into the unknown.